Hi, I'm Warren Cornelius, and you're watching Breaking the Cycle on Open Studio. We'll help you make informed choices about the prevention, treatment, and recovery of substance addiction by consulting experienced professionals and finding evidence-based solutions. Welcome. Today we're discussing prevention, specifically in youth and adolescents, and we have in studio with us Counsellor Dr. Zahid Badroodien. He's got many titles, but let him explain that. Welcome.
Morning, thanks for having me.
Thanks. Tell us a bit more about yourself and the work you do.
So I used to be a doctor, practicing doctor in Khayelitsha, in Tygerberg Hospital, spending a lot of time in a number of communities, especially in the Cape Flats, where I've learned a lot about substance abuse because I was very much engaged in trying to treat substance abuse, the effects of using drugs. And since then, a couple of years ago, I moved over into local government, became a counsellor, work very much in the social development space, the health space, the recreation and park space, and continuously ask myself, how can we pull all of this together to try and address the issues in our communities that can lessen the impact of drugs, either through prevention or treatment or suppression. And this is the space I'm in at the moment. Very interesting, a lot to learn. It's a space that changes all the time, but it's important to keep up with it so that we can really do our best for the communities that we serve out there.
Of course. Thank you for coming on board, and we're glad to have you on the show. So before we start, I'm going to just mention state some of the stats relating to substance addiction, specifically to youth and adolescents. These are dated stats, but let me just explain. So the South African Medical Research Council did a study, and they found that 66% of high school learners have already used alcohol. More than 1/3 of high school male learners regularly engage in binge drinking, which leads to absenteeism, academic failure, and risky sexual behavior. Alcohol and other drug abuse among adolescents is linked to increased risk of suicidal behavior and involvement in juvenile crime. Dagga is the most widely used illicit substance. Tik is the most common substance youth seek treatment for. These are quite eye-opening stats. So what the prevention? Prevention is really about the lessening of risk factors and the increasing of protective factors. That's kind of what prevention is all about. And the main, I suppose, risk factor with addiction is the early onset of the youth's first use, and that's what we're trying to do, is kind of prevent. We're not trying to say that people should never use a substance, but we're trying to prevent them using it so early in life, in the adolescent phases in life, because it has such a drastic effect on the rest of their development. What would you say are the other risk factors involved with substance use?
So those statistics you shared, even though they may be dated, still very relevant. Yeah. The National Drug Master Plan, which has been revised and updated very recently, still speaks to exactly just that, what you've shared with us. When we look at alcohol consumption as an example, what we're seeing, and from the research that is being shared, is that if you engage early on in alcohol use whilst in school, you have a 60% chance of failing or repeating a grade. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Because we live in a community space where alcohol, other drugs, very easy to come by. It's sold on many corners depending on the communities you're in. And that is also one of the risk factors, if you will, the ease of the availability of drugs. But when I think about the risk factors, I always think about it in a biopsychosocial approach, which is very easy to break them down into a...
Explain to the audience what
Yes. So biopsychosocial is basically a categorization that looks at, as you as a person, your biological makeup, the things that go on in your body that may increase or reduce your risk to or from something. Then psycho is everything that's happening inside your head, the impacts of your environment on that, what does that result in? And then your social, your immediate environment, the people around you, you and your relationships with a loved one, a family member, your community, your neighborhood. And so I break it down that way, partly because that's how we were taught in university, but also it's an easy way to try and remember exactly where on the spectrum you're able able to find risk factors or preventative factors, protective factors. From a in a biospace, you mentioned the risk of exposure in adolescence. But we must remember that your risk of exposure starts already while you're in the womb. And that speaks to the use and abuse of substances by a mother, whether it's alcohol, whether it's other drugs that then can affect the development whilst you're inside, because that's obviously going to have an impact immediately on your biological makeup, the development of your neurocognitive functions, and then later on in life, once you're born, the development of you as a child, then further into life. So that's very important, the biospace. But beyond that, we look at the early exposure, as you've mentioned, because using dagga once doesn't mean you're an addict. But using it because you've been exposed early, you use it continuously, you find yourself then in that space of substance abuse and disuse, which is where we as a city and province try and implement different programs to protect, prevent, and intervene in that space. But then also later on in adolescence, when we look at, again, ongoing exposure, ease of availability of the substance. But then we look at social, what's happening around you, peer pressure. Very big in our schooling space. How do you stay cool? What is cool? How does that impact then on your, again, use, that force that you're feeling to try and stay in, to be a part of something? But also besides that, when we look at interpersonal relationship, that family bond is so key. Is it a broken relationship that you have with your parents, with your perhaps family nucleus, your grandparents, your brothers, your sisters, your aunties, and so on? Why is that the case? How can that be prevented? And so those are some of the most important ones that I see very regularly in our communities, but also in the social development space.
So to summarize this, just to summarize the risk factors, I would say they fall into like 4 categories, which is the individual, which is kind of the genetic predisposure, the inside, I'd say being young is a predisposing factor, being male is a predisposing factor, the family relationships, the peer pressure, and the environmental and social factors.
The other one I forgot to mention, sorry to interrupt you, is that if you have a family member in your family that's using drugs or other substances, it means, again, you're seeing this at a young age, you're exposed.
Zahid, I'm so sorry to break your word. We're going to have to stop and go to an ad break. We'll be right back. Thanks. Welcome back to Breaking the Cycle. We're chatting with Dr. Zahid Badroodien. Zahid, so we spoke about the risk factors before the break, and now we want to focus on protective factors. And this is something that we need to go into detail with, because this is what we need to do to increase. We need to increase our protective factors to lower or to help prevent. And tell us a bit more about what protective factors are and what are the protective factors.
I like the way you broke it down earlier when you look at in an individual and then to look at your relationships and whatever else. Because we must, or rather, one of the important points that I consider very early on is that engaging in drugs or alcohol, whatever the case may be, starts with an individual choice. Noting, obviously, that there are factors that push and pull you towards something, and that's often, it's not a choice that people make for the fun of it. It's because of many issues that are around them. And in this space, we mentioned peer pressure earlier. We mentioned familial influences earlier. People may use alcohol in a home or drugs in a home and expose you to that. And so it speaks about, I think, an individual's fortitude, if you will, an individual's capacity to have that kind of space and belief in themselves, that to get into this and to stay away from that is an individual choice. To stay away from peer pressure, to avoid that, or to deal with it more constructively, starts with an individual to either stay away from it or to engage in other programs that can help you tackle and deal with it. So that's one of the protective factors. But we also know, if we look at the risk factors, things like poverty in our community, disadvantaged communities, if we look at early school dropouts and the impact of that in exposing you further to alcohol and drug use, speaks about considering those risk factors and preventing that early on so that they can become protective factors. So how do we keep young people in school for long enough so that they're able to finish matric, get into other forms of employment or vocation or further education, whatever they may choose. And also to that, how do we then help our families develop bonds to look after each other? And then beyond that, how do we look at the training of these families with skills that not only uplift parents to become more connected to the children, to the children, which is also a protective mechanism. But how do you then strengthen, so promote it and strengthen it, but then leave that individual, everyone who's involved in that space, with the skills so that if they then become families themselves, like mothers or fathers, that they then are able to transfer those skills into their own family spaces. So as an individual, how do we address those immediate factors? And then as a family and as a community, how do we address those factors? Obviously, as well, some of the protective factors must consider the role that government plays, the role that NGOs play. When I look at a government space, local government space specifically, what is social development doing to try and protect and prevent abuse and disuse of alcohol and drugs? And then also, how are we strengthening our relationships with NGOs or other organizations, private organizations that offer these services? Because surely all of these are part of that that menu of opportunities or options that are available to residents. But critically, what needs to be done in order to make sure that these protective tools and factors are addressed is the education and the communication about these, so that people don't feel as if they're alone trying to look after themselves, but rather that there's a helping hand, whether it's family, whether it's government, whether it's NGO, that we're all here to look after you. I was at the launch of a rehabilitation bus in Kleinvlei the other day, and what stood out for me was the slogan that the organization uses: no mother gives birth to a drug addict. And then the second part, do you know this one?
No.
The second part was no father wants the child to be a criminal, something like that. But very powerful, because it's so true. And if we can prevent it early enough, as we heard earlier, whilst you're still in the womb, that saying can be true in all of our communities.
So I deal a lot with people in recovery and even in the treatment of substance addiction, and you would be hard pressed. I mean, it's impossible to find somebody who can tell you, like, when I picked up my first drink or drug, I wanted to become addicted. Nobody. Everybody that's in recovery today, or everybody who has a substance addiction problem or substance abuse problem, never started out that way.
Absolutely.
There's certain factors that brought that person to where they are, you know what I mean? And those are the things that we need to have a look at, and those are the protective factors. And I want to have a look at, like, the question about, why do people use drugs? Why do young people use drugs? What do you think is from your take?
So I maybe want to share with you some of my experience in Delft when I worked in one of the clinics there in psychiatry. And I recall very clearly to this day my engagements with grandmothers, especially mothers would come in from time to time, but often it's the grandmothers who look after the children and the youth in these communities. And the one granny shared with me that she's so fearful of her life because her grandchild has stolen everything from the door handle on the bathroom door to her jewelry, to the plates that they eat off of, that she's got to lock herself in the room at night just to make sure that she's able to live to the morning. And this for me is very interesting because she spoke of a young person who has already become locked in, from what it sounded like in a life of abuse. And it wasn't hard drugs like Turk or Mandrax or whatever. It was dacha, something that people consider to be a social drug. Really does have astronomical impact on your body in various ways if you use it irresponsibly.
And early on in life.
And early on, especially that. But at the same time, this granny shared with me that her own child, the mother, was engaged in these behaviors as well. So there's that knock-on effect that we were speaking about. And so I believe that in terms of youth specifically, again, early exposure to drugs in the family, then early use of drugs individually, and then continual exposure in your community space to drugs, to alcohol, that is engaged in very freely, without fear of the law, Metro Police being present, or whatever the case may be, and to use it recreationally into the space of irresponsible use. That's part of it in your family when we look at the home, and then we look at the peer pressure.
Sorry to work your word. We have to go to another ad break. We'll be right back. Thanks. Welcome back to Breaking the Cycle in Open Studio. We're chatting substance use prevention, specifically in youth and adolescents, and we're chatting to Dr. Zahid Badroodien. Zahid, what options are there available on the Cape Flats, or what programs, substance abuse programs, are available on the Cape Flats?
So in our social development department, we have got an amazing team of people that every day pre-COVID would be out in our communities, educating, informing, connecting people to various services. But it's not only social development, and I'll speak a little bit about their programs, but City Health as well. Last year, we opened 2 new matrix facilities in the city. We, to my knowledge, the only city in the country that provides free rehabilitation services through our City Health, through our clinics. That is free of charge, as I've mentioned, in the vulnerable communities, that adopts an outpatient model of care, connecting you to groups and to training and to the support mechanisms that can help you deal with the triggers in the community. Very importantly, inpatient treatments usually take you out of that space, and then they help you manage these burdens that you're dealing with, and then they put you back in the community, exposed again over, and we keep fingers crossed that it will work. More often than not, it probably does work, but in terms of the evidence-based approach that we adopt when it comes to rehabilitative services through our matrix facilities, the remaining of an individual in their community, and the exposure and the dealing with those triggers directly, we've seen a lot of success in this. Thousands of people, whilst I've been a MACO member, have graduated from this program. And I recall at one of the graduation ceremonies in Goodwood, there was a lady who stood up and she said, counselor, and to all the staff members there, that before she was involved in this program, she had no hope. Her family had gotten rid of her. They had kicked her to the curb. She had nothing. She had no one. But because she made the decision to get involved in this program, she's getting married now. She's got her own home. She's back in school. These are amazing success stories. So that is available to our communities. That information is also easily available on the city's website. And we ask no questions. We welcome very warmly. Then we look at social development, and in this space we talk about prevention. The other one was treatment, now we're in prevention. And we consider the programs that we roll out very often in all parts of our community, from Mamrepela, Atlantis, all the way to Ocean View, Masipumelele, where there's a very good uptake of these programs. one of the programs, and I think a very successful one, is the Fetal Alcohol Syndrome Simulator program.
What's that all about?
It's an amazing initiative that social development started a couple of years ago, where not only do they have like this pregnancy kit that they put onto men to help them appreciate how demanding it is to be pregnant, but also helps them to grow a relationship with their partner. But at the same time, we've got these models, these simulators that show you a normal baby, that show you what the baby with fetal alcohol syndrome looks like, and then shows you a baby with other symptoms or signs. And this exposes them because it helps them to look out for some of the signs and can recognize how to get some treatment. And so we've rolled out thousands of these programs across the city with a very good response, because we see people making their way to our clinics. But also at the same time, we've got the after-school game changer program. Every single community hall, schools that are part of these programs, clubs, sporting organizations have shared with me the immense value. We as a city say, through social development, through recreation and parks, what can we make available to communities? How can we bring them into programs away from the triggers and then help them into something else? Over 4,000 people have already been involved in this amazing program that we see in the city.
Zahid, I want to speak about that after-school program you were speaking about earlier on, and what I've, in my experience, come across is that our youth has lost hope. They don't aspire to be anything more. In certain instances, I found youth at the ages of 15, 16 who's never left a 2-kilometer radius from where they live. They've never been to the city of Cape Town or onto the Table Mountain or the waterfront or the beach or whatever. They just live, and when they only see that environment around them, they don't have hope. And I think that's what we need to bring back to our communities, is instill hope and aspirations to our youth.
You know, that speaks to the other program, Strengthening Families program. Is a wonderful initiative, again, evidence-based, that looks at the family nucleus, the relationships between parents, children, communities, and then also considers the resources available to an individual in a community. Because we've got amazing libraries, over 100 of them in the city of Cape Town. We pull those resources into this program to open up worldviews, to expose people to worldviews, but we also help people with basic upskilling initiatives, like how do you do a budget, how do you use the little resources that you have in a way that can speak to the needs of your family. But at the same time, we expose them directly to other parts of the city, as you've mentioned, that they may never have seen before, to see something else, to see that hopefully shimmer of hope that they don't see in their community. And hopefully a person, and I've seen this many times, the question of how do I put myself in the middle of what is around me and be that active change agent, and how does that change start with me? That's the power and value of strengthening families.
So during the break, we spoke about faith-based organizations, and I want you to touch on how faith-based organizations can impact prevention, specifically in our youth.
Yeah, a very important question, and we also joke that you can't pray the sin away. The involvement of faith-based organizations must be one that is evidence-led, that incorporates all the ancillary services that can help an individual. I'm not saying that there's no room for prayer. Everyone is different. Everybody places different value on different things. And prayer to many people is vital and part of the healing process. I've seen this before. But it's essential that churches, mosques, synagogues, temples consider prayer as one of the tools for healing, but so too the psychological space needs to be addressed.
Zahid, we've run out of time, but it's been such a pleasure chatting to you, and I really hope you come back and do another show with us. Let's just recap on today's show. We spoke about prevention with adolescents, and the city of Cape Town has all these programs. We're going to make it available to you guys. Join us next week when we will be discussing treatment, and specifically the treatment of teenagers and adolescents. Come back next time. Goodbye.